Zoom is being utilized for this meeting. In case of technical issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after this meeting. We will be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Committee members, city council members, and staff are participating from remote locations, practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by use of Zoom as noted on the city's website and as noted on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak to the Climate Action Committee may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during the discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. Please use this new way to provide public comments. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Carrie, would you mind doing the roll call?
And just for those who are interested, the Climate Action Committee website is updated with all of the current committee members, but I do not have updates if there are any changes to the working groups. And I assumed that Ambrosia and Argus would be out on the zero waste group. I don't know if there are others. So, just let me know if you have future changes to that.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can make that an active action item for the working groups at the end. I'll just try to send you an update.
Perfect, great. So we'll go ahead with roll call. Jerry Glazer.
I'm here.
Jerry. Alex Goodman.
Here.
You, Dina Allen. I do not see Dina yet. Joshua Somone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Kenna Lee.
Here.
Lisa Pierce.
Here.
Debbie Burns.
Here.
Sonali Sikhan. I see Sonali's here. Sonali, can you mic check you? All right, we'll count her as here since I do see her and some technical issues. Woody Hastings.
He said he was likely to be traveling.
Okay. Argus Brent. Jasenia Garcia.
I'm here.
Everett Fernandez let me know that he is also has another meeting today and will join later if he can, most likely by phone. Ambrosia Thompson. Sarah Gurney.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. And Diana Rich. And I did get a note that you would not be able to attend today, but we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you for that, Carrie. Let's see, I do not believe we have a scheduled inspiration for this afternoon, aside from the fact that, hey, summer is really getting underway. I'm sure everybody is feeling it. So hopefully that brings a little more enjoyment than trepidation. Next up would be review of action items from prior meeting. On that front, working groups and committee members were asked to send any specific grant ideas for funding to Carrie to pass on through the city council. We are hoping from Carrie eventually for a budget calendar of the year so that we can interface better with that. That's more a longer term item than urgent. We did approve the recommendation for the transportation working group to get an updated proposal from Bird Micromobility to the city council. And we also tasked members to start reviewing our original priority list for the committee for a upcoming refresh of our sort of mission and task statement. And there's Everett. All right, before we get going in the regular parts of the agenda, are there any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? I am not seeing anything at this time. Next up would be statements of conflict of interest. Does anybody have a real or perceived conflict of interest potential for any items on today's agenda? Great, moving on. Next up would be the Planning Department report. Carrie, what news for the Climate Action Committee at this time?
Thank you. Let's see here. So a couple things going on. The budget subcommittee has continued their meetings. They did pick up on last this last Monday for a summary, and I wanted to thank Lisa and Steve Pierce for both attending to that. Lisa did submit a public comment to that group. It should be available on the website under that budget subcommittee name, but she managed to. I met with the funding group last week, and they were able to put together a number of items into that. So I think that was helpful. The grant discussion is being forwarded to the full council for discussion with no recommendation from the group, because I did feel it was something the larger group. So there's not a negative, a zero. And Councilmember Rich was very specific. I don't want it to say zero, which is a recommendation of nothing. I wanted to say no recommendation. And that's because those two committee members were not quite in agreement on that. And they also felt it needed the larger council discussion. Let's see, we did get notification from FEMA that the local hazard mitigation plan has been tentatively approved by them. And they actually said it was one of the better plans they'd seen in a long time. So that was really nice, since we all put in a lot of hard work. And I know some members of this group, as well as Phoebe, did some review of that and input. So thank you again for that. The next steps for that, we do have it scheduled for the June 7th City Council meeting. So the next step is for City Council to adopt it. And that'll be that date is when we're doing that. And then we submit it to FEMA for their final approval, because they do require that a city adopt it, not just submit it to them. But so we anticipate we'll have an approved local hazard mitigation plan soon for the city, which is great. That does a couple of things. If you're like, I think I might have described earlier, it makes sure that we are eligible for disaster-related relief funding from FEMA, and it also for the mitigations and the projects that are included in that mitigation plan, it does open up, and you're now eligible to apply for funding from both Cal OES or FEMA directly for those projects. And we did make sure that, we're talking about things like making sure that our water supply has continuous power in the event of a PSPS or extended power outage. Right now, they have to basically put a mobile generator up to that site after the week or so worth of water for the town that it has. It's based on gravity. But one of the things that I know we included whenever there's sort of generator languages, hey, let's not just do generators. Let's look at, since we have solar on most of our buildings, the potential to do solar with battery backup for those times and be, the sustainable route for our buildings. And I did talk with the funding group about that potential for the well site as well, just for all of its operations to potentially, it's a larger open space, so there is area for solar installations and things like that. So the Calder Creek Naturalization Project, which deals with localized flooding and stormwater management best practices, is also in that, along with a number of things related to the community center and other critical facilities in town, and also just how we go about planning our community and mitigating for potential disasters. The housing element is still in progress. We'll be releasing the draft of that later this summer, I believe. The deadline for that is to have council adopt it by end of January. And actually one note on the project approval, the Huntley Square 10-unit mini townhome received, that's the all electric and pretty well designed in terms of sustainability micro townhomes on Bodega. That was approved by the design review / tree board last Wednesday. So that is the final approval for that required for that project. So that is in. And the planning department's actually been pretty busy. We both have a lot more temporary use permits coming in for summer activities, as well as some development potential picking up. We did have a conversation, and it will likely be submitted later this summer with the folks from City Ventures who had been looking at the site behind O'Reilly. And I believe they do all electric as well development. They were looking at somewhere between 80 and 100 units on that site. They kind of put it on pause during COVID, but they are starting to, we had a conversation with them last week, John and I, as they sort of pick up and start doing some more due diligence on that site. And I think, and then the budget, so June 7th is the local hazard mitigation plan and some other items. The June 21st and July 5th are planned for budget, regular budget and capital improvement plan hearings. And then the July 19th is likely to be the climate action framework presentation discussion with council. And they can either adopt it at that meeting or the August 2nd meeting. So that's the tentative schedule for those projects. The budget hearings are pretty well, will be those meetings. So, Jerry.
I have comments or questions on 3 of the items you brought up. The water, we have uphill storage.
I'm going to get the number wrong. It's either well 5 or 6 is outside of town and on a hill. And so it is a gravity fed system.
Okay.
So that's, if we lose power, that's how we, yeah.
Okay, good. So one point to think about that, depending on how much storage there is, the solar would be great in order to pump uphill, but battery backup is not necessary because essentially the water which is stored up there is storing the energy. And as long as we don't run out of water up there, that is, if it has 2 days or 3 days, whatever, or even 5 days, we can have a lot less expensive project that would give us reliability that would be using renewables.
Well, put a generator on the downflow.
Well, as long as there's water up there, yeah.
So that well does have a number of days worth of capacity storage. Yes,
Okay.
that's the point of it. That if we lose power in a PSPS or earthquake or anything, it has a certain amount of, it's just gravity flow and it still works.
But essentially power storage or energy storage that we use in the US, the largest portion of it so far today is still uphill water. So the grant writing.
This is not really part of the agenda, folks. Let's not get too sidetracked, please.
Well, okay. As far as the grant writing, Zeno and I had a discussion, and one of the points I would like to make about, even though we submitted the projects for the council, I'd love if the council understood something. Often we have ideas for projects and we want to do them, and somebody says we don't have any money for it. That's the point of having a grant writer and a budget for a grant writer. It's not for those projects. Having somebody say, can you find a grant? Could we do this project? And that's an assessment as to whether the project go forward. And the last was the O'Reilly, just a point. When I was on the planning commission and the presentation was given to us, I did contact them afterwards because I was interested before being on this committee, microgrids. And I did talk to their project manager at the time about whether they could do that as a microgrid. And since then, also spoken with Jeff Cyphers. And maybe it can't be a microgrid, but they might be interested in having community storage, which is something that they could look at. They're very much a green group. So I thought that would be a great place for us to be looking at. And if we can hook in with them and see if there's some of the things we talked about, we can't find a way to do, would be to do there.
Jerry, could you submit these suggestions via email to Carrie as has been previously requested?
Oh, is that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah. Yeah, I know you've been out of the loop for a while, but we've been asked to send these in via email to Carrie. That's not what we're up to right now in this meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
Please. Thank you. Any other questions or comments with respect to the planning department report? Kenna, please.
Yes. Hey, I just didn't know, Carrie, where we landed with the Climate Action Committee presentation in terms of agendas for the council.
19th.
Well, she said the framework on the 19th.
The framework is going to be on July 19th. So if you wanted to do your committee presentation at that same time, that's fine. That would work well.
Okay, if that's what works best, then that's what we'll do.
Okay.
Great. Thanks for that. Moving on to City Council report. Any news from City Council relevant to the Climate Action Committee at this time?
Well, I think all the news is on other issues. Fire department, police department, mayors and council members.
Fair enough. Anything that seems pressing to our mission as such?
Well, I recommend everybody read the packet material and the minutes on the fire department recommended consolidation.
Interesting. Could you want to say a little bit more about why that relates to us?
The ad hoc committee came forward with that recommendation and referring the proposal to LAFCO, which involves about a year-long process, including potential property tax assessment for our citizens. There was quite a long discussion from the community as well as emails ahead of time. And the decision was to continue the ad hoc to September 30th to have them use money in the budget to hire a consultant to help with developing options rather than the sole recommendation of consolidation. They looked previously for a consultant and we haven't had much luck given the low budgeted amount. And hopefully there will be more community inclusive discussion on the way to September.
Okay, great. Thanks for that heads up there, Sarah. Much appreciated.
It's a big community item.
Sure. Point well taken. Any questions or comments from committee members or members of the public on council update this time? Okay, thank you. Moving on to our regular agenda for today's meeting. The first item is kind of an additional review of the project and pipeline proposal templates, which Alex has been so kind as to put together for us. Revised attachments went out with the meeting links for today's meeting. I hope everybody had a chance to review them. Now, Alex is welcome to correct me or look for additional input on this, but at this time, as I understand it, our item is to see if everybody is comfortable adopting these documents as draft working documents that give us guidelines as committee members and working groups on how to present ideas and move them forward through the committee process. So if we're open for questions and discussions, and I don't know if Alex has anything else he would like to tease out on this, but more or less the motion, which we may get to in a few minutes or not, depending, would be that we just sort of take these as our working documents moving forward, and that understanding they can be edited, but it just gives us a little more of a established format as to how to advance items from idea to action. Alex, yes, please.
Yeah, no, Joshua, you nailed it. We took the revisions that were stated to us last time, and just basically I just listened through the recording again and just made sure I caught everything. One thing I will add is we are going to adopt, well, at least I thought it was a good idea to adopt Diana and Carrie's third document, which is basically once kind of we've gone through the project and we're ready to take it to city council, it's a little bit more of a formalized document that you fill out to submit for city council presentation, I guess.
Okay.
Is the right word. So that would be the only change. It's basically it's just a more formalized version and a cleaner version of the project proposal document, which is kind of like more of a working document that I would see, teammates and working groups passing back and forth and using as a working document, whereas the other document is a document when you're ready to submit to actually share the proposal with either the Climate Action Committee or the City Council.
Great, thank you. So Alex, just to clarify a little bit further there, we're talking about the SCC draft template for agenda. item, and that in particular is for moving motions beyond our committee and taking them to the city council in general. Previous to that point, the project proposal outline template may well be sufficient in the working group and potentially for bringing them to our committee as a whole. Then particular note of the process pipeline, obviously there's 17 or more steps to moving a project forward. Just, everybody keep an eye on those things and note that each idea establishes its own timeline depending on the calendar and the other priorities going on there. So, Jerry, did you have questions or comments?
Where in the form, since we're the Climate Action Committee, I presume that the impact, we want to know what the impact is going to be as far as how it addresses climate. Where would that be put on the form? Like the amount of GHG or other things as far as
in the first document, I'm seeing that as within the goal results section for this is the project proposal outline. And there's certainly an analysis part of that related in the stages 4 and 5 or so, or of the pipeline. And
so it would show up on the document under goals. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that is less explained in the draft templates. That's more for the city council and more explained in the draft template that is for the Climate Action Committee.
It might be a different discussion, but again, it's from a talk that Zeno and I had, talking about the efforts that we take on and what's the objective. And hopefully the framework will help us understand better what our role is. And for me, the objective always is, reduction of greenhouse gases or mitigation, adaptation, or whatever else, and identifying those as the goals and quantifying them.
Certainly, sounds good. Any other questions or comments on these draft documents? Do people in general find them useful? Has this been helpful to sort of write all this out and have a bit more of a format, a template for how to move things along? It's been our hope between Alex and Ken and myself that we can just make it a little clearer and easier to move things along, so folks will have a sense of what kind of assistance they can look for, how to formulate the ideas and bring them to process. So those things being said, I would like to offer a motion, not as a facilitator, but just as a member of the committee. I propose that the Sebastopol Climate Action Committee adopt these draft working documents as working templates for our project generation process moving forward from here.
I second the motion.
Thank you, Alex. Any discussions or questions on the subject before we move towards a show of hands? Anything? No, all right. So for ease of tabulation, if people could use your little raise hand function, presuming you're a member of the committee, all of those in favor of adopting these working documents, please click your raise hand thing. Seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm seeing 9 in approval. Let's uncheck those hands, please, if you will. Any members opposed to adopting these as working documents moving forward? No. Anybody prefer to abstain from voting on the subject at the time? Jerry, I have you as abstention. Thanks very much. All right, so the motion is approved. Please hang on to these attachments. Understand that they're not perfect and exhaustive just yet, but they help us move forward and formulate our projects. Thanks very much. Any further questions or public comment on this subject at this time? All right, great. Our next agenda item is sort of a refresh and summary on the energy working group's work on examining the spectrum from REACH codes to city building code options. My understanding is that Jerry has prepared a proposal sort of summarizing their analysis and recommendations on this subject. We are not actually today trying to sign this off and complete a motion, we expect to be digesting the new summary and input and revisiting the subject in 2 weeks for what will hopefully be a final approval and a moving on beyond this committee and taking it to the city. Jerry, if you have anything to add, by all means, and feel free to share your screen at the right time. You are muted.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to get the screen right now. Just a second. There we go. Okay, is the screen being shared?
Yes.
Okay, good. Get in the right context here. Oops, wrong place. There we go. Just to go back over, I'm going to cover some ground of things we had before, since this has come back and forth, and this is pretty short. But basically, you have the background now on what is Title 24. I'll share the presentation later on for any of the details. We've been living under this since 1978, and it has improved over the years. Every 3 years, it gets updated again. And a lot of what gets put in is the result of what are the practices that people have been doing throughout the state. And there's 2 sections that we care about. One is Part 6, and that's the energy building standards. And then Part 11 is Cal Green, the Green Building Code. Last time it was updated was 2019. The revised version has gone out now for approval. Once it's approved, then cities have 6 months in order to adopt it, and then it will be in place for use and required use by 2023. Part 11 is the building standards. As of 2019, it has a mandatory section, so you don't have to mention anything in your municipal code about it. It applies to every city, period. But if you want to do something else, then you do have to mention it within your city code. And we removed mention of Title 24, Part 11 in 2019 from our city code. So it's no longer there. And that's one of the things that we need to probably rectify if we want to do some things. It's organized in different sections. I wrote this originally saying residential and non-residential also has commercial sections. There's mandatory and then there's voluntary measures. The voluntary measures are either ones that you can dream up, or in the case of Part 11, there's Tier 1 and Tier 2. If you think of them this way, Tier 1, if you adopt it in your city, that pretty much increases your or decreases your energy and footprint by about 50%. And Part 2 makes you pretty close to net zero as far as the amount of energy buildings will consume. And by the way, none of this is easy to read. And so if I got any of this wrong, some of it I got by asking experts. In other cases, the way that I got it was reading it and rereading it. And so possibly it's not exactly right. In the 2022 version, they encourage electric heat pump technology. They establish electric ready requirements. That is, if you build a building and you want gas, you can put in gas, but you have to put in enough electric power and all the wires and the receptacles for any appliance, so that if somebody decided to take the gas out and put in electric, they can do it very easily and cost effectively. And basically what it does is it makes installing gas into your building cost prohibitive, because you have the burden of the cost of the electric appliances when you put in the gas appliances. It strengthens ventilation standards, and it actually makes another differentiation, which is the significant part. It differentiates between gas. Are you all still there, or did I just lose you?
We're here.
Okay, because my screen is doing a weird thing at the same time and is beeping. Okay, anyway, so the ventilation requirements for gas are more restrictive than they are for buildings that are all electric. So that's added. And it now requires PV. The current Sebastopol practice, the building department only approves projects that are Cal Green Tier 1 compliant. The problem with that is they can't actually enforce that because it's not in our ordinances. And if it's not in our ordinance, then you can't enforce it. And it actually has to, Steve's done a little bit more research, and it has to be approved as well that you have adopted it. Now that's pretty easy to do. Also, we have in our code 2 watts of solar for every square foot of conditioned space. And such a requirement requires CEC approval. We never got that, so that can't be enforced either. So there's a number of things in our code that probably needs to be rectified. And if it did go to the CEC, we have no record that it went to the CEC and got approved. So we probably need to go through the process. And with the new code coming up, you have to go through a process every 3 years anyway. Steve put this list together. These are the things that we have in our code that probably would be REACH codes today. And they, in many cases, they would need to be approved either by the building commission or as part of CEC for energy. The 2 watts of solar, EV charging requirements, multifamily, EV charging stations and parking lots, signage for EV parking spaces. I'm not sure if that one really, that's a REACH, but I don't think it needs approval. And then certain of the fireplace code. I don't know whether those would require requirements either. This is just out of the code, how you adopt. It is not simple, but lots of communities do it, but they have a much larger staff than we do. Now, starting in 2022, I read the code and I kind of understood it, but then I went ahead and I contacted a Title 24 expert who does this for a living. And his answer was this: solar is now mandatory for all dwellings and ground up ADUs. Additions are exempt unless the municipal code specifies otherwise. And taken into consideration, and by the way, I couldn't find all of this in the code, is appliance types that are used in the installation, appliance efficiencies, the envelope thermal efficiency, the building orientation, and basically anything that can affect the overall energy efficiency of the home. I know I'm reading. Now, the reason I think these are there, even if you can't find them in the code, is there's one clause in the code that says, if you can demonstrate that the amount of solar you're putting on your building will satisfy the requirements of that building, then that's enough. Otherwise, there's a formula. So here's the formula.
Correct. And Jerry, there's basically 2 ways of that's sort of the performance versus the prescriptive.
Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And in fact, this is the this is the prescriptive form. It's a fairly simple formula, which takes the square footage, the number of dwelling units, and then factor A and factor B, depending on the climate zone you're in. We're in climate zone 2. So if you did this, here's a sample calculation for a 2,000 square foot building. Typical home. Here's the DeGlazer family home. I thought I would add this one in for kicks. Did the calculation on ours. Now it turns out if you have storage, you can reduce your solar requirement by 25%. So we have 12.5 kilowatts. If you have 7.5 kilowatts hours worth of storage, then this clause kicks in. And so for us on our house, we would require 1.84 kilowatts. We've installed 5 kilowatts, 4.9 kilowatts in our home. Our code would have said we would need 4 kilowatts. So the state's definition is lower. You know, the reason I did all of this was simply to answer the question that was brought up in one of the meetings I wasn't in. Steve said somebody wanted to know how is solar handled in the current code. I also show something else here on the right-hand side. This is what my PG&E meter looks like in one column. But then this is the other thing, which is what do I really need electricity for? So my car is not in the I really need electricity. I also don't have on my critical loads my oven or my dryer, because I could hang the clothes outside to dry them. And the car, that might be a questionable one. But that's a different discussion for another time with VGI, Vehicle Grid Integration, which is an initiative by the Department of Energy that PG&E is part of. So what paths can we take? We can do nothing and handle the Cal Green mandatory, gets better every single time. We can adopt Cal Green and a tier 1 or tier 2. Tier 1 allows mixed fuels. Tier 2 does not. It's all electric. Or we can implement a crafted reach code, putting other clauses we want. And we've already covered with you with the degree of difficulty and the degree of cost. And by the way, the cost is assessed every 3 years. So the question is, where do we go from here? I'm not sure Steve totally agrees with this, but I still believe it would be great if we had 2 chapters in our code, one called Green Building Code, another one called Energy Code, and we consolidated all those things that fit there. I know for a fact, and Avert knows it as well, that in our zoning, we have some things that would fit in a Green Building Code. Also might fit in an Energy Code, in particular, the charge stations for cars. It looks like you still have to have tier 1 not only be in your code, but it does have to go back to the building commission to get approved. It kind of surprised me, because why would you offer tier 1? But Steve Brown has also confirmed that that's the case. Anyway, so, oops. Oh, recommendation. Yeah. We recommend that we adopt tier 1. Since we're practically using tier 1, but we haven't put it in our code, we should change our code and put tier 1 in there. Title 15, by the way, if people aren't familiar with it, Title 15 is our building code. Title 17 is our zoning. Just looking to see what else we have down here as recommendations. And we would adopt by reference the energy code. And if we wanted to make any changes in the future, we'd have a place to make those. And we would remove 15.72, which is the mandatory photovoltaic system requirements, and adopt the states. Now, the requirement for the PV is lower than what ours is, but it's a formula that makes some sense based on other places. Our house, and I didn't read the list, our house is all electric. There's nothing in our house that runs on gas. So we use more electric than most households. Our furnace is now electric, our oven's electric, range is electric, water heaters are electric, or actually heat pumps. All of those are heat pumps. So the recommendation, just to make it simple, consolidate our code into 2 sections, adopt tier 1 by reference. That's actually very little writing to do, and probably some paperwork for submission is probably not terrible. And then adopt the energy code and remove section 15.72 of ours, and instead rely on the state's push for PV. So those are the recommendations. And then finally, the open items for the committee to continue to discuss, because Steve and I don't totally agree on this, adopting an all-electric mandate for new construction, whether we want to do that or not, and identifying incentives to accelerate the built environment to convert to all electric, or even adopt electric technology. We didn't come up with any, but if members of the committee can come up with ideas on how we could include in our code ways to incentivize people to put in hot water heat pumps, to put in heat pump furnaces. If I hadn't had my duct work redone, it's take the old furnace out, put the new furnace in. They last for a long time, so people don't tend to do that. But and this is always, he hands me books to read. One of the books said the most impactful thing we can do is change the system, and part of the change in the system is change how our homes operate and go all electric. So everything that we can do towards going all electric would be great, but that doesn't mean for new construction, because that's not terribly impactful in Sebastopol. It's the built environment that we need to focus on. And as you're hearing from Carrie, all 3 of the large projects coming into Sebastopol are focusing on being all electric. So having it in our code, from my point of view, isn't all that necessary. That's the last slide.
Okay, great. Jerry, thanks very much for the scholarship, and Steve as well on this subject. You can see that a lot of deep study and learning was involved there. Before we open to general questions, I want to ask, and again, we're not trying to decide anything today. We're trying to understand these recommendations and understand the thinking that's going into that. Before we move to general questions and discussions, I wanted to open up a little space for Carrie to respond on this subject. In particular, if adopting Cal Green and Tier 1 feels like an easy lift for the city, or if that's something that's really extreme. So maybe we'll just start there.
I do not think that's extreme at all. I think that's reasonable and what we should be doing at the very least.
Great. Thanks very much for that perspective. Jerry, just a clarifying question from me as a fellow committee member. My understanding of some of the many points you made is that there are electric incentives that we have brainstormed as things that might be worth proposing locally, but those would constitute a form of reach code, which would then be a heavy lift for the city. Is that no?
And they wouldn't be a form of reach code. Code says you have to do this.
Okay.
An incentive, I don't think we have to put in our ordinances. We can have a program for incentive of some sort. I don't know, actually, I'm going to guess. Fees are not documented in our ordinances. We post our fees. So if the city council came along, go ahead, Carrie, is that right?
I was just going to say, we have ordinances that authorize fees, but it's best practices to always do the fees via resolution to council, because it's a lot easier to change and update and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so Joe, what I was going to say was, we changed while I was on the planning commission, we changed the fees for our parks because we charge for use of our parks about 1/10 of anybody else in the area does. So everybody comes to our parks and pays $2. And the costs for us are the same costs. So we discussed and council adopted a new fee schedule. That probably didn't change in ordinance. The same thing might happen here. You might get a discount on a building. I'm not proposing this, but I'm saying that those are the kinds of things you can do. Your building permit might be different. Maybe the amount of time that you have to complete your building without renewal. Maybe there's other things that you get that are incentives. Other incentives are the kinds that I have gotten so far, which you get from the state, get from PG&E, and from other organizations. For the heat pump for our space, it was $3,000 came back from the state.
I think I misspoke on the details. So to clarify, incentives do not require or do not constitute a reach code, but mandates, for instance, you listed the example of all electric mandates for new construction.
Yes.
That's on the order of reach code as well. There was also a passing mention in there about some EV parking and charging requirements for multifamily housing and parking lots.
We have that.
So constitute a reach code in your estimation?
Since they're mentioned, the specification for parking is mentioned in Title 24 in chapter, I think it's in 11. I can't remember where I read it, but it is mentioned there. So one might think that if it's specifying it there, if you're changing that and specifying something else for less or more, that's a reach code. Because the definition of a reach code is anything that says we're going to do it different than the state. It's a reach code.
And so again, to paraphrase my limited understanding of your summary, you're actually seeking to eliminate some cases where Sebastopol has something resembling a reach code already, where there's certain cases where our rule exceeds the state rule. Yeah,
and actually, it resembles a reach code, but it's not enforceable because it's in our ordinance, but we didn't do the processes required for it to actually be enforced.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And again, for all the research and analysis. The floor is open for questions or comments on the subject from any committee members. I not seeing hands raised at the moment, I'm going to keep talking for a little bit to suggest. Now, Jerry, we talked about bringing this up again in 2 weeks for something resembling a motion. And presumably, if we approve a motion, then that motion moves on to City Council. I'm wondering if you all in your group feel ready to write up sort of a summary proposal statement for us to approve, and understanding that it could at this stage be a simpler version than what City Council might approve. I imagine
If
City
you go to-
Council would need
okay.
justification.
Go to the second to last page of, and I'll send this, I don't like to give presentations for people to read ahead of time because you can't tell what somebody's going to say. And I do a lot of talking and not a lot of reading when the presentation comes up. So on the second to last page, that is our recommendation.
Okay.
Create 2 sections, parts. I always forget what's the title, what's a part. It's title 15 and title 17, but what's below that is either a chapter or a part, whatever. You'd add 2 parts to the building code, start consolidating things within that. That's where you would specify tier 1, and you would retire 15.72. That would be the proposal. That would be the motion I would make were I to make it to the meeting at the next meeting, which I probably won't.
Would you all be willing? I see you, Lisa. I'll get there in just a hot second. I just want to finish this thread. Would you all be willing to take the template that we just adopted as a group for an agenda presentation to City Council, that which is to say the somewhat more formal one? Would you all be willing to sort of fill that out along these lines as a?
I don't see why we wouldn't do that.
Okay, great.
Lisa
Great.
certainly is capable of doing that.
Okay. Lisa, please.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jerry. That was great. I just have I haven't been nearly as involved with this process, to say the least, as Steve and Jerry have. So I understand the rationale for removing the solar, Sebastopol solar requirement, but I'm wondering, while we have Carrie here, what about the EV charging requirement and the signage requirement? Would that be a fairly easy thing to make that legitimate? Because right now it's not. Hard to say.
I think, yeah, I don't know what is involved with that process. I can't see that I don't know. I've never submitted anything to the CEC. That's usually the building department that would be doing that. But I certainly think, well, most of the time we have conditional use permits, so we're going to require it anyway as part of meeting our general plan and guidelines. And most people are fine doing it. I just inspected the Barlow townhomes, and they have space for 6 chargers already set up, and the rest is, I think, EV ready or capable.
I carry a couple of things. I started documenting what the 2022 code will have. Steve probably already knows as far as where chargers are required, where electric is required, and all of that. It may be more than what we have, and I don't know. I haven't actually compared that one yet. But the other thing is, you just said it and just triggered, and it supports something that we put in our recommendation. The building department would be the ones responsible for this. Oh, wait a second.
Right.
The planning department owns Title 17. The building department basically owns Title 15, but the requirements for chargers is in Title 17, not in Title 15.
Right. And so, but if Steve is submitting something for tier 1 or for some additional pieces, we talk to each other all the time. We have joint meetings every couple of weeks. I would just ask him to include the EV stuff into that and get him what he needs to do that.
Yeah.
So
I'm just
trying to answer Lisa's question of I don't know how much work is involved with that.
And I'm selling the concept of consolidate these things in the place where the person who's responsible for it and will see it, as well as the people who are doing the building.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the committee members on this agenda item? Or Zeno, sure.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering what other cities in the area and the county are doing in this regard, and also the RCPA, is it taking any direction? Has it any initiatives to get everybody online?
Looks like Phoebe is answering that in the chat right now.
What's that?
Looks like Phoebe is answering that in the chat right now. She might.
Why don't you just jump in, Phoebe, so we can hear it?
Sure, yeah, so there's a couple other cities in Sonoma County that have either an all-electric code or a natural gas ban, like the city of Petaluma recently adopted. The RCPA in the Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy, all-electric buildings is one of those goals, and so the RCPA is supporting jurisdictions that are interested in pursuing an all-electric building code. I don't think they're providing any sort of direction in that sense, but they're supporting jurisdictions that want to go that path. And there's also, as I think I've shared before, resources available through the statewide REACH codes program, technical assistance that's available to jurisdictions developing REACH codes.
Great. Thanks very much for that insight, Phoebe. Sarah.
I was wondering a question like Zeno's. What does Sonoma Clean Power say? Does anyone know, Phoebe? Has that come up in your research? Sonoma Clean Power. Anybody know?
As far as solar?
No, as far as all electric.
Of course.
Are they pushing every city go all electric?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, nobody said that, so I'm thinking we should.
Yeah. You talked to Jeff has talked to the energy group.
Right.
He's in the electric business. He's not going to sell gas.
Right. Well, if they're in favor of the codes, then that's really significant, isn't it? Because in a circumstance to have countywide action or the majority of the cities or a certain snowball building number of the cities go that way, it makes a big difference, I think. Thanks, Jerry.
Well said.
You saw in an earlier presentation that we gave, Sarah, and I didn't leave it in this one, the number of municipalities in the state of California. 3 years ago, they had all electric, and then how many have it today? It has become a popular thing to do. It's not inconceivable that in the 2026 implementation of Title 24, that will specify all electric, because they'll look for, it's like Highway 12. Why is it 35 miles an hour, then 40 miles an hour and 35 miles an hour? Because that's the speed everybody's going. And so we post those speeds. Title 24 often is done the same way, and they'll admit it.
All right. Thanks for that perspective. Steve, did you have something to add, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some of the struggles around deciding to go all electric or not, given that we are building some 12 odd houses a year. I don't think that even really includes the kind of larger developments that have happened or are on the books. That even if in a situation where you have a requirement that they have to wire for all electric, what we've seen in cities that have already had those requirements, still people will go gas because they love their gas stoves. So my concern is, come 2026, if it's not in the code for the statewide, and there's definitely a possibility it won't be in the code because there's pushback from state senators down in Southern California, Democrat from LA, trying to make it more difficult to go all electric, and potentially bringing up lawsuit potential against those cities that have done it. So to say we don't want to pursue it, I think it might be a little premature. I know the payoff isn't that great, but we get those 12 houses a year in there, the odds are they're going to be doing gas for quite a bit of it on those small single family homes. And we'll have to end up waiting till those gas units fail 12 years down the road till when they finally do switch to electric. So those are my concerns.
Well taken, Steve. Thanks for the longer term view there. Zeno, did you have something else to add?
I wonder whether any city requires by code that the power used in these houses is 100% renewable. I mean, it kind of, it does make sense to try to get gas-powered vehicles out of the city and bring in electric power that is generated by, I mean, probably not a lot of coal, but gas and some other biomass that is controversial. So I wonder whether is there a possibility to kind of push in this direction, that we're not just requiring all electric code transformation, but also we say something about the source of that power.
So it's interesting that you asked the question. It's not something that we researched, but you saw in the presentation, the analysis that's given even by CARB is that if you adopt tier 2, you're essentially net zero. And the only way that you could be net zero then in a residence, whatever, is you had enough solar that you were powering all of the appliances and your car and whatever else in your home. And at that point, you could essentially say, yeah, anybody who has adopted tier 2 has also done exactly what you said, specified that only renewables are used to power a home.
Should be said, we have it really easy around here with respect to that issue, given the Sonoma Clean Power and Evergreen and the geysers and all that.
Yeah, we have a lot of options.
Phoebe, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the point that this is maybe not going to affect very many units. These REACH codes often apply also to major remodels, which sort of increases the number of houses it would apply to. And yeah, just to echo Steve's point that any gas infrastructure that's put in now is going to be around for decades. And that's something that's not really compatible with a 2030 carbon neutrality goal. And you know, the city or this committee has already taken action to eliminate fossil fuels and working on the gas station ban, even though we knew there was very little chance of a new gas station being built. There is a very high likelihood of more housing being built, and we know that we need that housing. So just wanted to point that out.
Great, thank you. In terms of practicalities and timeline, a question back to Jerry and Steve. Is it practical to consider your recommendations with respect to updating the city code independent of REACH code considerations, or is there a time-sensitive nature with a process such that REACH codes would have to be recommended immediately, or is that something that we could add on later?
Here's the answer, and Carrie will probably pop in 1 second. Absolutely, you can do this separately. You'll just double the amount of work the staff has to do.
Fair. Lisa?
So I guess my biggest concern towards actually doing more of a REACH code is that it's going to be expensive for the city. And I do think that if it would be so wonderful if we as a city could actually do something to incentivize the as-built environment with people who have gas, who are looking for a little nudge and a little help with getting to their homes electrified instead. And it seems like we might be getting more bang for the buck if we spend our dollars there instead of with the code. That's just, I don't really have an opinion about it strongly. It's just my thought.
Sure. Okay. Jerry, something else?
Yeah, something else on it. Just what Lisa said. So we go ahead and we fill out the form to bring back to the committee. You know, I did send something to the committee and a number of other people about the process that was used in another city, where staff has an opportunity to make comments, and it's part of what comes back to the committee. I'd like to fill out the form, and instead of in the next meeting sending it and having us discuss it, I'd like to send the form then to staff and allow Carrie and Steve and whoever else to look at it. In the version that I'll write up, I'll make the addition. I'll get Steve and Lisa to help me and Tor to write it up. and make the addition that we specify for new homes that they be all electric. Does somebody want to let Everett back in again?
Yeah.
And then we would send that off to Carrie and Steve. They can look at it and they could do the research and find out, okay, how complicated is it for us to do this? How much will it cost us? If we did it without the all electric, is it any less or is it identical? Does that
Sounds
sound like a
reasonable.
reasonable approach?
Yeah, added as a sort of an additional option. They're all frozen. All right. We've done very well so far, and we'll come back to this again. Thanks everybody for your time and attention on the matter. Any other questions or comments before we move on to our next agenda item at this time? Okay, thanks again to NV Working Group, and we will revisit this in 2 weeks with a slightly more condensed and
4 weeks.
formalized. 4 weeks?
Review it in 4 weeks because we want
Got
to
it.
give
Sorry,
staff
late
time
June.
to.
Late
Right.
June, got it, June 22nd. My apologies, yep. Two meetings. That's what I meant. Got it. All right, our next item on the agenda is an update on the climate action framework draft process and subject from Phoebe. Just so everybody knows, we will be delving into this subject in greater detail at the next meeting. So this is essentially an informational update at this time, as I understand it. Phoebe, please.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. So as you heard from Carrie earlier, the climate action framework presentation to council has been moved back a little bit later. So that's going to be now July 19th. So the timeline for the process has shifted a little bit. Not sure that we will, whether that full committee discussion will be at the next committee meeting or the one after that. So that's something Ken and Joshua can discuss tomorrow. So with the sort of shifted timeline, I'm hoping to have a second draft to share back with the working groups for review before there's a public draft. So hoping to get that out sometime the week of June 6th. And thanks again to everyone who's provided feedback on the draft, had a couple more really productive meetings with the working groups. So I'm working on incorporating all of that feedback and thinking about restructuring the document a little bit. So that's it for my update.
Thanks very much for all your work and outreach in particular, Phoebe. Can you tell us when does your tenure end? I know your position only lasts through a certain point in the summer. How is that going to wrap up?
Yeah, so my last day is August 12th.
Wow, okay. So as my understanding is the July 19th is a presentation to the city council and then hopefully a review and adoption on August 5th. Is that what we heard?
So I believe the item on July 19th will be informational as well as have the potential for adoption if the council doesn't have any edits. If there are edits, then it would come back to the August 2nd meeting with the goal of adopting it then.
Okay.
Right, and the council would also have the option on the 19th of advising on some edits if they're minor and adopting it. So not having to come back on the 2nd. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So down to the wire, but clearly ahead of your deadline, fortunately. I didn't want things to get pushed back too far there. All right, those things being the case, just so you all know, Phoebe and Ken and I will be meeting again shortly to try to finesse the schedule with respect to the framework updates and our meeting schedules and agendas so that that's parceled out well in the next couple of months. I want to open up the general subject for consideration, not at this time, but just start ruminating in the back of your mind. Once we have the framework and Phoebe takes off, what the heck are we going to do with it then as a committee? Because this is sort of a big, heavy lift. It was one of our major goals in the founding of this committee was to get a plan or a framework in place. In a couple of months, we will have said framework, and it will then be our responsibility to figure out how to advance it, how to move it forward. To point out, Phoebe did offer the suggestion within her framework draft that we look at the appendix of items, items that could be tried, and that we make something like a quarterly or seasonal evaluation of which items within the appendix we might want to try to move forward. So that is one, viable model for how we might approach that. Again, just something for us to all start thinking about. What do we want to do with the framework? How do we want to keep that effort moving forward once Phoebe is no longer here to guide the ship so ably for us? Another little heads up, Kenna and I will be attempting to sort of, with that question and with the question that was asked previously of how do our original priorities as a committee fit us today, in the next season or so, we're going to try to have more input from the committee as to how we set up our, not just our process, but also our work plan for the seasons ahead. Can we get a little bit clearer sense of our goals and mission and timeline? How do we become a little bit more effective now that we have about a year and a half or so of figuring out how this whole thing is working? How can we get a little bit better at moving things along? So again, I just want to open up those subjects for consideration in the time to come. And Sunali, please. Just barely can hear you. Chat.
I think you're asking for a copy of the Sunnyvale Climate Action Plan that Jerry worked on in the past, just as a comparison for review.
Oops.
Great. All right, any other questions or comments on the subject of climate action framework and its upcoming timeline process? Oh, good.
Josh, I would just make one comment because actually last night's Planning Commission meeting, we discussed updating the Planning Commission's work plan. And so I do have a framework that, and Jerry, I don't remember if you were on the commission when we started that, but Everett, if he's available, can maybe talk a little bit about it. But basically what it is it's, and I'm happy to share where it's at with this group, is, it's a prioritization activity that I'm happy to facilitate with this group. It may be that you have several because your working groups are extremely independent and able to very highly functioning. It's the most highly functioned group that I've seen in terms of gathering the amount of data and the correctness of that data and bringing it forward to the group. But I'm happy to try to facilitate something, and that is, what we do with the general plan is we have basically will be in the appendix of all these actions that we should investigate. And what we do with the Planning Commission is every couple of years, we prioritize them, and that becomes a work plan for the Planning Commission and the Planning Department in a sense. So there is some balance of if things require staff, but it is adopted by a full group. And then we actually bump it up to the city council so that we make sure that we're on the same page with the city council. And then when I go ask for funding for something, they're aware of it and understand, and they've essentially signed off, and they see, a consultant in my budget to do this project that, and then those can change every year for this committee or every couple of years or whatever makes sense. So I just offer that up as an option.
Great, thank you for that. Is there any particular seasonality to that, Carrie, that needs to happen to interface with the other city processes?
Not really. I think because it's a longer range, I think it took us 2 years to get through the, 6 or 7 items that we've gotten through. Includes everything as easy as the standard conditions of approval, which were just adopted by council, to the telecom ordinance revision, which was a huge effort. So, it is a longer range perspective on, what projects to take on. And it certainly does not include all the little micro projects that might, like the compost events and things like that. It's more the larger initiatives that are going to take people time and commitment, and it's a way of sort of recognizing that everyone has limited. We want to do everything, but what are we going to prioritize and really focus on?
Great, thanks for that.
I will send out that, Joshua, that budget calendar examples for the last couple of years, and it's usually pretty typically
Okay.
what those are. I would say doing that before January would be helpful in terms of the schedule.
Got it. Okay. I think we're anticipating this sort of late summer, early fall, that there's a little bit of a transition in sort of our, not exactly what we're doing, but how we're doing it and how we're redefining our goals. So just a little bit of a heads up for folks to consider moving forward. By all means, we're interested in your input and your thoughts on the subject. So again, the open questions on that at this time are, what do we do with the framework? And also, how do we revisit our original priorities and mission as a committee from back when? Lisa.
I think that having Carrie's input is very, very useful. She has so much understanding of how the city works and how to get money and all that kind of stuff. And I think for us to come up with our priorities together with her might be a really great idea.
Okay. All right, if everybody's okay with it, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is working group reports. So we have about 20 minutes left in our meeting time. I know there's a little bit of news from the chairs, but I don't think anything extensive. So at this time, if any working groups want to check in with updates or thoughts or subjects that are on their mind, we'll start with Debbie.
Dina's camera is not working, nor is her microphone. So this is, she would just like to make sure that everybody, that all the working groups fill out the form that the survey that Kenna had sent out. And that they can email them back to her and within a week or a week and a half. And yeah, so.
Great, thanks for that. So that, again, that was an attachment to the agenda that everybody should have already gotten. There is a mid-June city event at which we're hoping to have a little bit of a tabling presence. Working groups are invited to participate in that. Should have it already. Okay, any news from any other working groups at this time? All right, not seeing any hands, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda is chair reports. Kenna, anything to bring forth? Not particularly?
No, I was prepared to discuss the council presentation, but since it has been delayed, I don't think we need to take time today to talk about it.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I have a little bit of an update, not especially from a chair position, but just from the RCPA's Climate Action Advisory Council meeting. The last one was in about a month and a half ago in April. I attended that. I don't recall if Zeno made that meeting as well, but I know he does attend that as well. So there were a lot of things that got covered at that meeting. I'm just going to give a brief recap in hopes that it may spark interest for some of you. Essentially, the RCPA was reviewing their 2022 policy priorities, mostly through BCCAP's presentation, excuse me. A few highlights that stood out: the greenhouse gas inventory is being worked on for 2020, should be available in June or July. They are compiling a portfolio of reach code options for cities and working with BayWin. So essentially RCPA is trying to prepare a toolbox of best management practices that cities within the region can use as part of their frameworks for moving forward. For instance, noting that Petaluma has a natural gas ban in place, that they framed that in a particular way to make it interface with the state requirements a little more easily. RCPA is also generating a countywide existing buildings equitable electrification strategy, apparently based on a precedent that's out of Berkeley these days. So in terms of those incentives and ways that the city can promote existing electrification remodels to our citizens, there's a lot of other resources developing from the RCPA, and they would be a good window for us to access other things. There are, let's see, there is a countywide active transportation plan in progress. They are looking for grants to create their direction or their hub on that. Persisting existing carbon stock, supporting local gas station bans. Okay, also RCPA is also working on an equity statement along with the Transportation Authority, which, if I got the timeline right, is being presented to their board last week or so. They're expecting final approval on that in June. So again, RCPA has created an equity statement about climate mobilization, and that could be a good time for us to potentially revisit that subject and see if our approach to equity in projects is up to date. And that is about what I have as reporting from that meeting. Okay, Lisa.
I'm interested in what the RCPA is doing with the electrification of buildings. And I'm wondering how would be the best way to find out what's being planned?
Let's see, Phoebe may be better able to answer that than I can.
Yeah, so that's a planned project for later in this year, and it hasn't been started yet, as far as I know. Staff is still focusing on completing the greenhouse gas inventory.
Okay.
So that would be starting sort of late summer, fall. And I would hope that they keep you updated through that group that Joshua is part of as far as how that's going.
Great, thank you.
And Phoebe, you already had some resources on that subject, and I want to say switcheson.org and some other ones like that have been highlighted.
Yeah, I've sort of been collecting resources as part of the research for the framework, but I think it's a pretty complex topic, and so I would sort of recommend waiting for the RCPA to do some additional work on that before Sebastopol sort of decides the best path forward.
Point well taken. But also noting that Berkeley apparently has something like that in place, so it could be worth studying their model in the meantime. All right. Anything else from the chair working group front, Kenna?
Yeah, just Sonali's mic is out, so she wanted me to remind everyone that we do have a send-off for Jasenia on June 1st at 4 o'clock in Ives Park. And it's an opportunity for us to just socialize a little bit as a group and wish her well in her journey. So bring any handmade offerings, food, music, poetry, anything to wish her well, and it'll be nice to see you all there.
Great, thanks very much for that. Okay, our next item on the agenda would be input from members regarding next meeting agenda. Obviously, we have a few things in the works, so all the major things that have been mentioned so far will be coming up again in due course. Does anybody have any other items or requests for the agenda, particularly the next meeting, but potentially a couple meetings from now? Debbie.
I think it would be really great if we could talk about, an overall budget that we could work on and have a proposed budget that Carrie could give to council, because my understanding is the way it works, they won't have a holding place for us for money. We actually have to ask for something, and these budgets are done on a basis where we'll miss out on opportunities. So if people could think about what they would like in their working groups to be able to spend money on, and then we're willing in our working group to take on making the budget and presenting it to Sherry. I'm sorry, Sherry.
By which you mean an annual budget for Climate Action Committee activities, more or less?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then one note on that, Debbie, just in terms of the current budget cycle, because we've already had I did put a placeholder in, as I noted a few minutes ago, I think of about $15,000 for Climate Action Committee related initiatives. It was reduced, but the line still stays there, so it was reduced to 5,000. That said, the fact that it's still in there as a line item is extremely helpful, both in terms of mid-year and the recognition that there's priority. If there, so that's something that I have the authority to sign off and, help when you're doing things that require, some cost or another, like with the upcycle art and, some of the other projects. If there's a larger project, we can always present it to council and request additional funding for that specific project as well. So just in terms of, I think having that, Debbie, what you're talking about of like understanding what it is we're trying to do, that whole thing will feed directly into next year's budget, but it can also feed into, this year in that way where we have a placeholder.
So just so I understand, it was reduced from 15,000 to 5,000, but they're in addition to that 5,000, which we have, and you can use how, whatever we need. There's discretionary income at the council that we can put in for more income before the next budget and get approved for more money for larger projects.
Yes, if there's something that comes up like, and actually this is, if the Civic Spark Fellow had come up after the budget, it came up at the last budget hearing and was included in the final. But if that comes up, say in October, and it's a $30,000 thing, but the committee is recommending it and really wants to move forward with it, that's something that I brought to council as we can bring as a standalone item and request funding for it.
Oh, well then maybe. Okay.
But the importance of having, the reason that the number was reduced from 15 to 5 is because they don't necessarily like to see placeholders that don't have identified initiatives connected to them.
So at the identify initiatives, we could get that number up, and then if there was something on top of that, so it'd be nice to,
exactly. You got it.
Carrie, if I heard you correctly earlier, you said that the annual time for that is sort of December to January when it interfaces with the city's larger process. You're muted, but I think you're saying yes.
Thank you. So for instance, this year, I think my budget was due to the finance department city manager on February 15th.
Okay.
So if you work back from there, that's, you start thinking about it in November, December.
Right.
So you get to numbers associated with it if you don't already have numbers.
Thank you. So in a general ballpark, we can take, presumably we get to something like a work plan, we translate the work plan into something like a requested budget by the end of the year, and then we start to really interface. Okay, great. Thank you. I have Sarah and then Jerry.
Just very quickly, I think Debbie has a good idea. Carrie does have some discretion and carries up on what the budget committee is doing, but you have to remember that's only 2 people. And I just want to underline and put in bold, if you want money and you have a good reason for it and you're not in the budget, ask anyway and ask loudly, because that's the way things get done. And what is the worst case scenario? If you ask in the fall, it gets delayed till January or February with the mid-year budget considerations, along with everybody else who asked for more money. I don't want people to be discouraged because there isn't a big enough line item where there's no line item. The way we get things done is to ask and to do.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I do want to clarify, the budget so far has only been reviewed by the budget subcommittee, which is 2 members. It's going to the full council June 21st, and they can make whatever changes they want as the full council. So.
Great. Jerry?
Again, I have these conversations with Zeno. He makes me think a lot. One of the things that Zeno brought up as a frustration was that we have a transportation task force, and they take on and think about bicycles and pathways and alternative forms of transportation. Well, as a survey was sent out by the city on proposals for bike lanes, and but that task force wasn't told. The committee wasn't told about it. No coordination. This is something just in general, and I'm not taking this. I'm taking this as an example because we have other examples that have occurred. I'm hoping that in the creation of the framework, that the roles of the various commissions and committees are well established, so staff knows who to inform when an issue is taken up. Planning today, until things change, has taken the place of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission, hasn't taken the place of Parks and Recreation Commission, because that means staff would have to go to 3 meetings instead of 1 meeting. And we're a small city, so we consolidate things. But now we've created a Climate Action Committee. I call it the Sustainability Committee, and it has a role. And perhaps some of those things need to move around, and hopefully we can rationalize some of that so Zena won't be so frustrated.
Sounds good. More strategic planning to make ourselves and help each other be more effective. Excellent. All right. Well, let's see. We are now at the place of review of action items from today's meeting. Firstly, working groups should send in their current list of members to Carrie. She mentioned right at the beginning of the meeting, which some folks may have missed, that our committee website is updated. We have a current list of members, but we don't have the current working group roster up there. So I thought the easiest way to do that would be for each working group to kind of self-identify, list your members, just email that into Carrie. It will go to the website.
Please CC myself and probably Joshua on that.
That does help, because we'd like to make that list for each other as well, and new members and that sort of thing. One of the things we're trying to do is compile a set of documents that we can give to new members or to people who wonder, what do we do and how do we do it? That would be part of it, list of the current working groups. Okay, let's see. Secondly, we did all officially adopt those 3 templates for proposals and pipeline process and other things that begin with P. And so everybody should be referring to those and advancing your agendas and your motions and your action items and your reports forward. And we're all here to help each other. Feel free to check back in if there's clarifications or things need to shift in practice, but let's all try to adopt those models working forward, and hopefully it'll bring us a little more into smooth alignment. Next up, we did approve the Energy Working Group's recommendations with respect to the building code in an informal fashion so far. So Energy Working Group shall be writing up a short version of that recommendation, which we will review 2 meetings from now. Also, working groups are encouraged to respond to the survey that was put forth about tabling at the June 18th meeting. That was, again, an attachment to the agenda. You should have gotten it already. And a reminder that June 1st in Ives Park, there will be a social to wish Xenia farewell. Carrie, anything else to add today?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can actually just share my screen, I think, with the I think I can share my screen. it just did some weird thing. It's not letting me and I can do this next meeting as well, of the various working groups. I'll just post them to the chat. And if you have corrections right now and you have a couple minutes, just go ahead and put them right in the chat, and then I'll have them. So I just posted those to the chat.
Okay, if you want to get a head start, working groups, go for it. Other than that, I believe we have completed our agenda for the day. Thanks very much, everybody, for your participation. See you again. Oh, just in case you didn't know, I'm going to Italy on Saturday. I'll be out of here for a few weeks, but I'll see you all again. Not next meeting, but the one after. Be well, carry on. Enjoy the summer.
Hope you have a great trip, Joshua.
Travel safely, stay healthy. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.